The emergency session alarm echoed through the crystalline halls of the galactic council chambers for the third time in 2 standard cycles. Ambassador Zethkar of the Vorthon Empire adjusted his ceremonial robes with trembling claws as he watched. The holographic displays showing the advancing darkness that threatened to consume everything they had built over millennia. "The Devourers have consumed the Kepler arm," announced High Chancellor Morwen, her usually melodious Etherian voice crackling with static from the neural implants that kept her connected to the galaxy's information networks. 17 civilizations. Gone. Not destroyed, not conquered. Consumed entirely, as if they never existed. The assembled representatives from across the galaxy shifted nervously. The Bolkari delegation, massive stone-like beings who had survived 3 galactic wars, looked genuinely terrified for the first time in recorded history. Even the Cybernetic Nexus Collective, who prided themselves on emotionless logic, were running probability calculations that all ended in extinction. Zethkar stood, his voice carrying the authority of a species that had ruled space lanes for over 10,000 years. The mathematical certainty is undeniable. At their current rate of expansion, the Devourers will reach the core worlds within 50 cycles. Our combined fleets cannot slow them. Our most advanced weapons pass through them like light through empty space. A younger representative from the aquatic tribes raised a tentacle. Oh, what about the Ancients' technology? The sealed vaults on Terminus. "Prime opened and emptied," replied the Chancellor grimly. "The weapons that ended the Dark War 5 millennia ago barely scratched their scouts. Devourers adapt, learn, and grow stronger with each encounter." The chamber fell silent, except for the hum of translation matrices and life support systems. These beings represented civilizations that had mastered faster than light travel, manipulated matter at the quantum level, and created artificial consciousnesses indistinguishable from organic life. Yet they sat in their advanced chamber, defeated. By an enemy they couldn't understand or fight. "There is one possibility," spoke a voice from the shadows. The assembled delegates turned to see Archivist Kellner, keeper of the Forbidden Archives, stepping into the light. His species, the Chroniclers, were known for their perfect memory and access to knowledge others deemed too dangerous to preserve. The records speak of a species in the Outer Rim, barbaric by our standards, barely achieving interstellar travel. They call themselves humans. The word came out like something distasteful. They have a peculiar reputation for violence and unpredictability that has kept the local civilizations wary of contact. Chancellor Morwen's bioluminescent patches flickered with skepticism. A primitive species. What could they possibly offer that our advanced civilizations cannot? Kellner projected a holographic star chart, highlighting a small yellow star in what most considered the galaxy's backwater region. According to intercepted communications and long-range observations, these humans have spent their entire recorded history in a state of constant warfare, not just against external threats, but against their own species, their environment, even abstract concepts like poverty and disease. The Vorthon ambassador scoffed. "Savages fighting among themselves hardly seems relevant to our current crisis." "Perhaps," the archivist continued. "But they have developed weapons and tactics born from desperation that we, in our enlightened civilizations, never considered necessary. They have survived ice ages, plague, near-extinction events, and each time emerged more resilient. There are reports of individual humans continuing to fight even when logically they should have surrendered." The holographic display shifted to show intercepted human military footage. The assembled delegates watched in fascination and horror as human soldiers used improvised explosives, fought in conditions that would kill most species, and displayed a stubborn refusal to accept defeat even when facing overwhelming odds. "They have a saying," Kellner noted, reading from his archives. "When the going gets tough, the tough get going." Another one. "It's not the size of the dog in the fight, but the size of the fight in the dog." A representative from the Peaceful Harmony Coalition raised a concern. But surely their primitive technology would be useless against the Devourers. The Chronicler's expression grew grave. "Technology, perhaps. But they possess something we may have lost in our advancement. the absolute refusal to surrender, and creativity born from desperation. When humans cannot solve a problem with available tools, they create new ones. When they cannot fight an enemy conventionally, they find unconventional methods. The chamber buzzed with discussion as various species debated in their native languages. The translation systems struggled to keep up with the overlapping conversations about orbital mechanics, psychological profiles, and tactical assessments. Chancellor Morwen called for order. Even if we accept this proposal, why would these humans help us? By all accounts, they have been ignored or avoided by galactic civilization. What incentive do they have to risk their lives for species that consider them beneath notice? Zethkar had been quietly reviewing human historical data on his personal display. His expression was unreadable as he spoke. According to these records, humans have repeatedly rushed to aid others, even strangers, even enemies, when faced with extinction-level threats. They seem to possess an irrational compulsion to help the helpless and fight the unbeatable. Or something else added. The archivist. The humans have been monitoring our communications. They are aware of the devourer threat. Several of their military organizations have been preparing for the possibility that the danger might reach their system. The massive Balkari delegate, General Throck, finally spoke, his voice like grinding stone. In the deep wars of my youth, I learned that sometimes the best weapon against an overwhelming enemy is not the strongest fighter, but the one crazy enough to try impossible things. If these humans are as stubborn and unpredictable as the records suggest, perhaps their madness is exactly what we need. The debate continued for hours, but eventually the vote was unanimous. With their advanced weapons useless and their civilized tactics inadequate, the galaxy's greatest minds would humble themselves before a species they had dismissed as primitive. The message pods were prepared with translation matrices, star charts, and a desperate plea for help. As they launched toward the small blue world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, none of the assembled delegates truly believed these humans would be their salvation. They had no idea. They were about to unleash something that would make the devourers seem like the message pod crashed into the Nevada desert at 3:47 a.m. local time, creating a crater that immediately attracted every intelligence agency within a 1,000-mile radius. By sunrise, the area was sealed off with a perimeter that would have impressed Cold War generals. Dr. Sarah Chen, leading xenolinguist at the United Nations First Contact Protocol Division, stood in the sterile underground facility, staring at the translated message displayed on screens that covered an entire wall. The words seemed impossible, yet the mathematical proofs and star charts attached to the communication were undeniably real. "They're asking for help," she said to General Marcus Rodriguez, head of Earth's newly formed Interplanetary Defense Initiative. "An entire galactic civilization is begging us to save them from something called the Devourers." Rodriguez, a veteran of 3 wars and countless peacekeeping operations, looked skeptical. "These same aliens who've been ignoring us for decades suddenly want our help? What makes them think a planet that can't even stop fighting itself can help them?" The message pod had contained more than just words. It held observational records of human history, tactical analyses of human conflicts, and profiles that read like they'd been compiled by beings who had been watching Earth for generations without making contact. Dr. Chen pulled up one of the tactical reports. "Look at this assessment. They've been studying our military history, our response to crisis situations, our technological adaptation rates. According to their analysis, humans have one of the highest survival rates per capita. When facing extinction-level events in the known galaxy, that's because we're stubborn idiots who don't know when to quit," Rodriguez muttered, but there was pride in his voice. The facility's main screen flickered as new data streams arrived from deep space monitoring stations. The images that appeared made both humans pale. Entire star systems were simply vanishing from sensors, not exploding or collapsing, but ceasing to exist as if they had never been there. "Jesus Christ," whispered Rodriguez. "How fast are they moving?" Dr. Chen ran calculations on her tablet. "Based on the galactic coordinates and timeline, if they maintain current speed and direction, they'll reach our local group in 18 months. Maybe less." The general activated his secure communication link. Priority Alpha alert to all department heads. Emergency session in the Situation Room. Classification level beyond black. Authorization, Rodriguez, 77 Alpha. Within hours, representatives from every major world power sat around a table that had been designed for discussing Earth's problems, not galactic extinction events. The Russian delegate, General Petrov, was the first to speak. If these galactic civilizations with technology thousands of years ahead of ours cannot stop this threat, what exactly do they expect us to accomplish? President Martinez, attending via secure video link, leaned forward. According to the message, they want us to think outside conventional parameters. Every species they've contacted follows logical, predictable patterns. They're hoping human unpredictability might find solutions their advanced minds cannot conceive. The Chinese representative, Admiral Liu, pulled up holographic displays showing human military innovations throughout history. They have historically excelled at asymmetric warfare. When facing superior enemies, humans develop unconventional tactics that exploit unexpected weaknesses. Dr. Chen highlighted specific sections of the alien analysis. They're particularly interested in what they call our irrational persistence. The tendency for humans to continue fighting long past the point where logic dictates surrender. Guerrilla warfare, basically, said the British intelligence chief. The ability to take massive losses and keep coming back from different angles until the enemy makes a mistake we can exploit. General Rodriguez stood, pulling up a map of local space. But there's something else. According to their data, these devourers consume everything: matter, energy, information. Traditional weapons pass through them. Energy shields are absorbed. Biological warfare is ineffective because they're not technically alive in any way we understand. The Japanese delegate, Dr. Yamamoto, had been quietly reviewing technical specifications. There's an interesting note in their files about human creative destruction. They reference our nuclear weapons as an example of humans being willing to use tools that could destroy themselves if it means stopping an enemy. Mutually assured destruction, nodded President Martinez. The willingness to accept catastrophic losses if it means the enemy doesn't win. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. These advanced alien civilizations were essentially asking humanity to find a way to commit suicide, creatively enough to take their enemies with them. General Rodriguez broke the silence. There's more. The message includes technical specifications for faster-than-light communication and transportation. They're offering to share technology that would advance our civilization by centuries. In exchange for, asked Admiral Liu, everything. Dr. Chen replied grimly. Every human military unit, every weapons program, every individual willing to fight. They want to transport our entire military infrastructure to the front lines. The room erupted in multiple languages as delegates conferred with their governments through encrypted channels. The magnitude of the request was staggering. An entire planet being asked to join a galactic war that they barely understood. After 2 hours of heated discussion, President Martinez called for order. The consensus from all participating nations is unanimous. We need more information before committing humanity to what might be a suicide mission. Dr. Chen activated the reply system that had been built into the message pod. I'm composing a response requesting direct contact with their military leadership and complete tactical data on enemy capabilities. As she typed, General Rodriguez reviewed deployment scenarios on his tablet. If we do this, we'll need to coordinate every major military force on Earth, special operations, conventional forces, research divisions, weapons manufacturers. This could be the first time in human history that every nation fights together against a common enemy. The message was transmitted using the alien communication protocols. The response came back faster than anyone expected, carrying coordinates for a meeting point just beyond Pluto's orbit and specifications for human ships that could survive the journey. But it also carried something else. Real-time footage of the devourers, consuming an entire civilization while their victims begged for help that never came. As the leadership of Earth watched advanced beings with technology beyond their comprehension being erased from existence like they had never existed. One thought echoed in every mind: If these devourers reached Earth, there would be nowhere left to run. For the first time in human history, retreat wasn't an option. The only choice was to fight or watch everything they had ever known simply stop existing. General Rodriguez looked around the room at faces representing billions of people. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we just volunteered for the most important war in galactic history. Outside the facility, news of strange lights in the sky was beginning to spread across social media. Humanity was about to learn they were no longer alone, and their new neighbors needed them to become the galaxy's weapon of light. The human fleet that assembled beyond Pluto's orbit was unlike anything Earth had ever produced. In just 6 weeks, every major space program had contributed vessels. Hastily retrofitted with alien faster-than-light drives, the USS Enterprise led the formation, followed by ships from Russia, China, India, and a dozen other nations that had never cooperated on anything more complex than weather satellites. Admiral Sarah Okafor stood on the bridge of the Enterprise, watching her tactical displays as they approached the rendezvous coordinates. The alien technology interfacing with human systems created displays that would have seemed like magic 6 months ago. Contact on long-range sensors, reported Lieutenant Commander Torres from the navigation station. Holy Mother of God. The main view screen activated, revealing a sight that made the assembled human crew fall silent. Thousands of alien vessels stretched across space in formations that defied comprehension. Ships the size of Manhattan, floating next to crystalline structures that seemed to bend light around themselves. Organic-looking craft that pulsed with their own life rhythms, dwarfed geometric vessels that looked like they had been carved from pure mathematics. This is Admiral Okafor of the Terran Fleet 2 approaching alien vessels. They're responding to your request for assistance. She broadcasted on the frequencies provided in the message pod. The response came in perfect English, though the voice carried harmonics that suggested multiple species speaking in unison. Welcome, humans. We are the Combined Galactic Defense Force. Prepare for transport to the command vessel. The transport beam was unlike the crude teleportation theories human scientists had theorized. One moment the senior human officers stood on their bridge, the next they materialized in a chamber so vast they could barely see the ceiling. The air itself seemed alive with energy, and gravity felt different, as though it had been carefully adjusted for multiple species. Admiral Okafor found herself face to face with beings that challenged every assumption about life in the universe. The Vorthan delegation towered over her, their scales shimmering with internal light. The Etherians floated rather than walked, their crystalline bodies translucent and constantly shifting color. Most unsettling were the Bolkari, who looked like living stone sculptures that somehow conveyed intelligence through eyes that burned like stars. I am High Admiral Zethkar, announced the largest Vorthan, his voice carrying the authority of millennia. We command the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. 147 species, 30,000 capital ships, weapons that can crack planets and shields that can withstand stellar explosions. General Martinez, who had insisted on joining the diplomatic mission despite protests, stepped forward. Impressive. Why do you need us? The question caused ripples of movement through the assembled aliens. Some translated among themselves, while others consulted holographic displays that appeared from thin air. Etherian Chancellor, Morwen materialized beside the human delegation, because all of our advantages are irrelevant. Watch. The chambers. Walls became transparent, revealing space around them. Suddenly, darkness appeared at the edge of the display. Not the darkness of empty space, but something that actively consumed light itself. As they watched, it encountered a small moon. Moon didn't explode or break apart. It simply ceased to exist as though it had never been there at all. The darkness grew slightly larger. The Devourers, explained Zethkar grimly. They consume matter, energy, information, even the quantum foam that underlies reality. Our most powerful weapons strengthen them. Our shields feed them. Our technology becomes part of them. Dr. Chen, who had insisted on accompanying the military delegation, studied the readings on her tablet. How is that possible? Conservation of energy alone should prevent that kind of consumption. A new voice spoke from the shadows. They exist. Partially outside our dimensional framework, said Archivist Kelnor as he stepped into view. Imagine, if you will, creatures that view our three-dimensional reality the way you might view a drawing on paper. They can manipulate it, consume it, or ignore it as they choose. The human delegation exchanged glances that spoke volumes. They had come expecting to provide conventional military support, not to fight beings that existed in dimensions they couldn't fully comprehend. Admiral Okafor studied the tactical displays. Show us a battle. How do they fight? The chamber's displays shifted to recordings of the Devourers encountering the galactic fleet. Human officers watched in growing horror as advanced warships fired weapons that could destroy stars only to see their energy absorbed and turned against them. Force fields that could withstand supernovas were drained and consumed. Entire fleets simply vanished into the growing darkness. 11 major engagements, reported the Bulkati General Throck, his stone-like features grim. 11 defeats. Each time, we lose more ships, and they grow stronger. General Martinez studied the battle recordings with the eye of a career military officer. You're fighting them like a conventional enemy. Formation tactics, concentrated. Firepower, defensive perimeters. But if they can absorb everything you throw at them, why are you still using the same strategies? The alien commanders looked at each other with expressions that didn't translate well across species, but clearly conveyed confusion. Zethkar's scales darkened. What alternative is there? These are the tactics refined over millions of years of galactic warfare. Guerrilla warfare, said Martinez simply. Asymmetric tactics, hit and run. Make them chase you into traps. Force them to fight on your terms instead of theirs. Chancellor Morwen's bioluminescent patterns flickered rapidly. But the mathematical models show that scattered, uncoordinated attacks would be even less effective than concentrated firepower. Dr. Chen looked up from her tablet. What if effectiveness isn't the point? What if the goal is to make them adapt in ways that create weaknesses? The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. These aliens had been trying to win through superior firepower, but humans were suggesting they try to lose in a way that set up future victories. Admiral Okafor addressed the assembled alien leadership. We need to see everything. Every battle record, every sensor reading, every analysis you have of these Devourers. If we're going to find a way to beat them, we need to understand not just what they can do, but what they can't do. Archivist Kelnor activated massive holographic displays that filled the chamber with data streams. This represents 47 standard cycles of observation and analysis. Combat records, energy signatures, adaptation patterns, dimensional readings. Mildly human. Officers studied the data with growing excitement. While the aliens saw patterns of inevitable defeat, human military minds began identifying something else. Behavior patterns, response times, adaptation cycles. They learn and adapt, observed Lieutenant Commander Torres. But learning takes time, even for them. And if they're adapting to threats, that means they perceive some attacks as more dangerous than others. General Martinez nodded. They're not invulnerable. They're just using our own strength against us. But what happens? If we don't give them strength to absorb, what if we give them something completely different? High Admiral Zethkar leaned forward, his massive form casting shadows across the human delegation. Explain. Admiral Okafor smiled grimly. What do you know about human military history, Admiral? Specifically what we do when facing enemies? With superior technology and firepower? We reviewed your historical conflicts as part of our assessment, replied the Vorthon commander. Then you know that humans have repeatedly defeated technologically superior enemies through tactics that seemed impossible or insane. Okafor continued. We're going to teach you how to fight dirty. The chamber erupted in discussion as various species debated the concept of abandoning millions of years of civilized warfare. Doctrine to adopt the chaotic tactics of a species that had barely achieved interstellar travel, but as the darkness continued to spread across the galaxy, consuming entire civilizations. The assembled leadership of galactic civilization prepared to learn warfare from the galaxy's most recent arrivals. They had no idea they were about to unleash something that would terrify the Devourers almost as much as it terrified. The training facility constructed in the Arcturus system defied every principle of military architecture the galaxy had developed over millennia. Instead of the orderly, symmetrical designs favored by advanced civilizations, the humans had insisted on a chaotic maze of different environments, from asteroid fields to artificial nebulae filled with radiation that interfered with sensors. Colonel James Tank Morrison stood before an assembly of the galaxy's finest military officers, beings who commanded fleets that could sterilize planets and had tactical experience spanning multiple galactic wars. Most of them towered over him, possessed technology he couldn't fully understand, and had been fighting wars when his species was still discovering fire. He didn't care. "Everything you know about warfare is wrong," Morrison announced, his voice carrying across the training chamber through translation matrices that struggled to convey his particular brand of aggressive confidence. "You've been fighting like gentlemen for so long, you've forgotten how to win ugly." The Vorthan Flight Commander Kestar, whose scales denoted victories in 16 major campaigns, raised a clawed hand. "Human Morrison, with respect, your species has barely achieved interstellar travel. What could you possibly teach officers?" With centuries of experience, Morrison grinned, the expression apparently universal enough that most species recognized it as predatory. "Watch and learn." The training chamber reconfigured itself, creating a simulation of a typical devourer encounter. Holographic enemy forces materialized, dark shapes that seemed to absorb light and energy from everything around them. The assembled alien officers automatically began forming the traditional battle formations their species had perfected over eons. "Stop," Morrison commanded. "First lesson. Forget everything you think you know about honor in combat. Honor is what gets your people killed when you're facing an extinction-level threat." He activated his own tactical display, showing human military history. Vietnam War, Earth year 1955 to 1975. Technologically superior force with advanced weapons, air support, and overwhelming firepower defeated by an enemy using improvised weapons, tunnel systems, and guerrilla tactics. Showed human soldiers doing things that made the alien observers uncomfortable, hiding in impossible positions, using their own wounded as bait, turning civilian infrastructure into weapons, fighting dirty in ways that violated every military protocol the galactic civilizations had developed. Captain Thess of the Etherian Navy, her crystalline form flickering with distress patterns, spoke up. "These tactics are barbaric. They violate every principle of civilized warfare." "Civilized warfare is a luxury," replied Morrison bluntly. "You don't get to stay civilized when the alternative is extinction." Second lesson. Your enemy doesn't care about your rules. The simulation reset, this time with Morrison directing the battle. Instead of forming neat battle lines, he scattered ships throughout the asteroid field, using natural cover and unpredictable movement patterns. When the simulated devourers approached, expecting to absorb energy from conventional weapons, they instead encountered something entirely different. The human-designed tactics didn't rely on overwhelming firepower. Instead, they used the environment itself as a weapon. Asteroids rigged with crude explosives, gravity wells created by repositioning small moons, even solar radiation focused through reflective debris fields. The devourers adapt to what you give them, Morrison explained as the simulation played out. So don't give them what they expect. Give them problems they've never encountered before. Balkari General Throck, his stone-like features showing rare interest, leaned forward. "Explain the minefield strategy." Morrison pulled up schematics for human-designed weapons that made the alien observers uncomfortable. These aren't energy weapons or conventional explosives. They're filled with everything we can think of that might confuse or slow down entities that exist in multiple dimensions. The devices looked crude compared to galactic technology, but their contents were disturbing: religious artifacts, quantum paradoxes encoded in crystal matrices, recordings of human music played at frequencies that shouldn't exist, even biological samples from Earth's most stubborn life forms. "You're using irrationality as a weapon?" asked Chancellor Morwen, her bioluminescent patterns expressing confusion. "We're using chaos," corrected Colonel Martinez, who had been working with Morrison on tactical development. "The Devourers are perfect adaptation machines, but adaptation requires pattern recognition. What happens when there is no pattern? The simulation continued, showing hit-and-run attacks that made no logical sense, retreat patterns that led enemies into prepared kill zones, and supply lines that doubled as weapon delivery systems. Disturbing of all were the human volunteers who served as decoys, leading devourer forces into traps with a casualty rate that horrified the watching aliens. Flight Commander Kestar's scales had shifted to colors indicating deep concern. Your tactics assume acceptable loss rates that exceed total population for most species. Morrison's expression grew grim. Lesson 3. Sometimes winning means being willing to lose more than your enemy thinks you can survive. The training chamber reconfigured again, this time showing the human concept of total war. Every factory converted to weapons production, every civilian trained for combat, every piece of infrastructure designed to be useful to defenders and dangerous to invaders. We call it asymmetric warfare, explained Dr. Chen, who had been working with the Tactical Planning Committee. When you can't match your enemy's strength, you don't try to. You make strength irrelevant. General Throck studied the tactical displays with growing understanding. You fight not to win individual battles, but to make the war itself unprofitable for your enemy. Now you're getting it. Morrison nodded approvingly. But there's more. Show him the psychological warfare protocols. The display shifted too. Show human information warfare tactics that made several alien species visibly uncomfortable. Propaganda that could drive enemy forces to despair. Communication protocols that spread doubt and confusion. Even weaponized entertainment designed to make enemies question their own motivations. You wage war against the minds of your enemies? Asked Archivist Kelnor, his expression unreadable. We wage war against everything, Morrison replied. Their supplies, their communication, their morale, their assumptions, their strengths, their weaknesses, and especially their expectations. The assembled alien officers spent hours studying human tactical manuals that violated every principle of civilized warfare they had developed. Concepts like acceptable losses, strategic retreat, and victory through exhaustion challenged their fundamental understanding of military engagement. But as they studied the records of human conflicts, a disturbing pattern emerged. Despite being technologically inferior in most of their wars, humans had repeatedly defeated enemies who should have been able to crush them easily. Chancellor Morwen's bioluminescent patterns flickered rapidly as she processed the implications. Your species has been preparing for this kind of conflict your entire evolutionary history. Morrison nodded grimly. Every war we've ever fought has been asymmetric in some way. We've never had the luxury of fighting fair fights. Flight Commander Kestar reviewed combat footage of human forces in action, scales shifting through colors that indicated growing respect mixed with horror. You fight like the galaxy is already lost. Because it might be, Morrison replied simply. And if it is, we're going to make sure we take the bastards with us. The training exercises continued for weeks, with alien officers learning human tactics that horrified and fascinated them in equal measure. They learned to think like predators instead of soldiers, to see every resource as a potential weapon, and to accept that survival sometimes required becoming something their civilizations could barely recognize. By the time the training was complete, the combined galactic defense force had been transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history, a military force that fought to win rather than to maintain honor. They were about to discover that unleashing human tactical doctrine on a galactic scale would terrify the Devourers far less than it would terrify. The war room aboard the flagship Eternal Dawn had transformed into something the galaxy had never seen before. What once housed the civilized military planning of a dozen species is now buzzed with an energy that made even veteran warriors uncomfortable. Human advisors moved between alien commanders like predators studying prey, their eyes calculating distances, weaknesses, and opportunities that others couldn't even perceive. Admiral Zethkar of the Valorian fleet watched in fascination and growing horror as Captain Sarah Chen outlined their next assault. The human woman pointed at the tactical display with casual confidence, marking enemy positions that seemed impossible to breach. Her plan wasn't just unconventional, it was madness wrapped in brilliant strategy. The Devourers expect us to attack their strongest points, because that's what honorable species do. Chen explained to the mixed crowd of alien officers. They've reinforced their primary bases, positioned their fleets in defensive formations, and prepared for the kind of warfare they've always known. But humans learned long ago that honor is a luxury the dead can't afford. She zoomed in on a seemingly empty section of space. This is where we hit them, not their military targets, not their battle stations. We target their supply lines, their communication relays, their fuel depots. Make them hungry, blind, and desperate. The Catherian commander, General Vextu, clicked his mandibles nervously. But Captain Chen, civilian targets are protected by the Galactic War Convention. Surely we cannot. The convention died when they started eating entire worlds, interrupted Commander Jake Morrison from across the room. You want to beat monsters? You have to become something they fear more than death itself. The transformation had already begun throughout the Allied fleet. Human military instructors worked tirelessly with alien soldiers, teaching them concepts that challenged everything they believed about warfare. The proud Valorian warriors learned to hide and strike from shadows. The tech-advanced Catherians discovered the brutal efficiency of improvised weapons. The peaceful Zanari were shown how their healing abilities could be weaponized in ways that made their enemies wish for death. Dr. Alina Vasquez had become something of a legend among the alien medical corps. Her lessons on psychological warfare, through modified healing techniques, had revolutionized their approach to captured enemies. Where once they would provide standard medical care, they now employed methods that kept prisoners alive but deeply uncomfortable. Techniques that made captives eager to share information about devourer positions and plans. Pain is temporary, she explained to a group of Zanari healers who struggled with her teachings. But fear. Fear changes how an enemy thinks, how they plan, how they sleep at night. A terrified enemy makes mistakes we can exploit. The first test of these new human tactics came at the Korath system, where a Devourer scout fleet had established a forward base. Traditional galactic warfare would have demanded a frontal assault, ship against ship, honor intact even in defeat. Instead, the human-trained forces struck like a virus infecting healthy tissue. Small teams infiltrated the outer mining stations, not to destroy them, but to modify them. Human engineers worked with alien technicians to turn automated mining equipment into weapons. Cargo haulers became guided missiles. Communication arrays were reprogrammed to broadcast false orders throughout the enemy fleet. The Devourers woke up to find their own infrastructure turned against them. Mining lasers carved through their ships' hulls. Their communication systems screamed contradictory orders that sent their formations into chaos. Supply ships, hijacked by human-trained infiltrators, delivered explosive surprises instead of ammunition. But the real horror began when the Devourers tried to retreat. Human-taught guerrilla fighters had seeded their escape routes with traps that defied all military logic. Harmless-looking debris fields contained hidden weapons that activated on proximity. Asteroid mining facilities suddenly revealed themselves as camouflaged missile platforms. Emergency beacons, traditionally sacred in galactic law, became death. Traps that lured rescue ships into carefully prepared ambushes. Captain Rodriguez watched the battle unfold from the bridge of his commandeered Catherian vessel, his face showing neither satisfaction nor remorse. Around him, alien officers stared at the tactical displays with a mixture of awe and revulsion. They were winning, but at the cost of everything they had believed about civilized warfare. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Veshta, a young Valorian officer, "the enemy fleet is requesting terms of surrender." "Denied," Rodriguez replied without hesitation. "Let them run. Let them spread the word about what happens when you threaten human allies." The aftermath of Korath became known throughout the galaxy within days. The Devourer scout fleet hadn't just been defeated, it had been psychologically shattered. Survivors spoke in terror of enemies who fought without honor, who turned their own tools against them, who seemed to anticipate their every move with predatory intelligence. More importantly, other species began to take notice. As the hegemony, the collective, and dozens of smaller powers that had remained neutral suddenly found themselves reconsidering their positions. Reports filtered in of diplomatic channels buzzing with nervous activity, as civilizations tried to determine whether humanity viewed them as friends or potential threats. The galactic balance of power had shifted in ways no one had anticipated. The humans hadn't just provided military assistance, they had fundamentally changed how warfare could be conducted. Species that had fought according to ancient codes of honor for millennia now faced the terrifying prospect of enemies who recognized no such limitations. In the depths of space, Devourer commanders gathered in emergency council. Their reports painted a picture that challenged everything they understood about galactic civilization. These humans didn't just fight. To win, they fought to ensure their enemies would never dare threaten them again. "They turn our strengths into weaknesses," reported Fleet Commander Krast H., one of the few survivors of Korath. "Make our honor into foolishness." They fight as if death itself were their ally. But perhaps most disturbing of all, other species were learning. Across the galaxy, military academies began requesting human instructors. Trade agreements included clauses about defense partnerships with Earth. Ancient alliances were quietly reconsidered as civilizations wondered whether they could afford to be on the wrong side of humanity's expanding influence, the galaxy's greatest. Fear was no longer the Devourers and their endless hunger. It was the growing realization that in calling for humanity's help, they had introduced something far more dangerous into their ordered universe, a species that viewed warfare not as a necessary evil, but as an art form to be perfected without. 6 months after the Korath system victory, the galaxy had become an unrecognizable place. The war against the Devourers continued, but it was no longer the desperate struggle for survival it had once been. Instead, it had transformed into a systematic extermination campaign that left even hardened military leaders questioning what they had unleashed. Ambassador Kethmer stood before the emergency session of the Galactic Council, his hands trembling as he read the latest reports. The chamber, once filled with the proud representatives of 1,000 worlds, now felt like a courtroom where civilization itself stood trial. "The Devourer fleets have abandoned 17 systems in the past month alone," he announced to the gathering. "Not because they were defeated in battle, but because they fled in terror before our forces even arrived. The humans have taught us to become something that frightens creatures who devour entire worlds." In the audience, Captain Sarah Chen sat quietly beside Ambassador Williams, watching the debate unfold around them. The human delegation had grown smaller over the months, as Earth recalled many of its military advisors. Their job, it seemed, was largely complete. The transformation of galactic warfare had exceeded even humanity's expectations. The Valorian Empire, once known for their honorable warrior culture, now employed tactics that would have horrified their ancestors. Their fleets struck from stealth, targeting civilian infrastructure and using psychological warfare that broke enemy morale before the first shot was fired. The Catherian technocracy had weaponized their advanced technology in ways that pushed the boundaries of what could be called ethical. Their scientists, once devoted to peaceful research, now created viruses that could infect Devourer bioships and turn them against their own fleets. Their artificial intelligence networks had learned to infiltrate enemy systems and drive opposing commanders to madness through subtle manipulation of their ships' environmental controls. Even the gentle Zenari had embraced humanity's lessons with disturbing enthusiasm. Their natural healing abilities had been perverted into instruments of prolonged torture. Captured Devourers found themselves kept alive indefinitely while experiencing constant, carefully modulated pain that extracted every piece of useful intelligence. From their alien minds, Dr. Alina Vasquez watched from the gallery as the council debated what to do with their newfound military capabilities. Her students had surpassed her teachings, developing techniques that made her original lessons seem almost merciful by comparison. The proud warrior races had learned to fight dirty, and they had discovered they were very, very good at it. "Question before us," continued Ambassador Kethmer, "is not whether we can defeat the Devourers. That outcome seems assured. The question is what we have become in the process." The hegemony representative, a tall, crystalline being named Sharveth, rose to address the assembly. "Our intelligence networks report that 12 neutral civilizations have already begun developing the human-taught tactics for use against their own neighbors. The Courtney Republic has used human methods to resolve a border dispute with the Talaxian worlds. 3 merchant guilds have disappeared entirely after attempting to negotiate with human-trained negotiators. Commander Jake Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The reports were troubling, but not entirely unexpected. Humanity had known that teaching other species their methods of warfare would have consequences beyond the current conflict. The galaxy would never be the same. Furthermore, Sharveth continued, our long-range sensors detect massive fleet movements throughout the outer territories. Species that have never shown military ambition are suddenly building warships designed with human tactical principles. The galaxy stands on the brink, not just of victory over the Devourers, but of a new kind of warfare that threatens to consume us all. Ambassador Williams finally stood to address the assembly. His voice carried the weight of a species that had seen too much conflict throughout its history. Honorable delegates, you came to us when you had no hope left. You asked us to save your galaxy from extinction. We've done that. But every salvation comes with a price. He gestured to the tactical displays, showing Devourer retreat patterns. Your enemies are broken, their fleets scattered, their home systems under siege by forces they cannot comprehend or counter. Within a year, maybe less, the Devourer threat will be eliminated entirely. But in saving your civilization, we've changed it forever. The chamber fell silent as Williams continued. You've learned that honor is a luxury, that mercy is often weakness, that sometimes survival requires becoming something you never wanted to be. These are hard lessons, and you cannot unlearn them now. Captain Chen stood beside him, her expression grim but resolute. The question isn't whether teaching you is right or wrong. The question is what you do with these capabilities now that you have them. Humanity has lived with this knowledge for millennia. We've learned to carry the weight of necessary darkness while still striving for light. Over the following weeks, the final campaigns against the Devourers unfolded with mechanical precision. Human-trained forces didn't just defeat their enemies. They eliminated them so thoroughly that other species would whisper warnings about the fate of those who threaten the new galactic order. The last Devourer stronghold fell not to overwhelming firepower or superior technology, but to a psychological warfare campaign, so subtle and devastating that the defending fleet surrendered after experiencing what their commanders described as waking nightmares that made death seem preferable to continued resistance. But victory brought no celebration. The galactic civilizations found themselves staring at their own reflections and seeing strangers. They'd become efficient, ruthless, and terrifyingly effective. They had also become something their ancestors would barely recognize as Earth's. Military advisors prepared to return home. They left behind a galaxy forever changed. The Devourers were gone. But in their place rose something potentially more dangerous, a collection of civilizations that had learned to fight like humans. In the depths of space, automated monitoring stations recorded the birth of dozens of new military academies, each one teaching refined versions of humanity's tactical doctrines. The galaxy had not just been saved from the Devourers, it had been transformed into something that could survive in a universe where honor was a weakness and mercy could be a death sentence. The greatest irony was not lost on humanity's observers. In answering the galaxy's desperate call for help, they had not just defeated one nightmare. They had taught an entire galaxy to become nightmares themselves. Whether this transformation would prove to be salvation or damnation remained to be seen. But one thing was certain, the galaxy would never again face extinction from external threats. It had learned too well from humanity's darkest lessons to ever be that vulnerable.